Well, I don't feel like I'm a part of the everyday American society, and I don't want to be, let me tell you. Okay? I do my damnedest to tear it down.
A governor's task force has determined that punk rockers are society's new subversives and must be treated as such.
Taxation is theft.
Oh! God damn it, motherfucker!
We're talking peace, love, and honor. These governments of this world are coming to an end.
The FBI is feeling the heat.
Your own conscience, your own morality, your own decision, your own self. You alone can do it. There is no authority but yourself.
The BR Hates Fed Show. Welcome to the rice fields, motherfuckers.
What's up, lads and ladies? I'm BR and I hate feds, and today is Wednesday the 3rd of March, 2021. So we're 5 episodes deep now, and I'm kind of like in the grab bag of fucking rambling and nonsense we seem to come across here on the show, so I think we're gonna stick with it, and if you guys want to stick with it too, we'll see how it goes. If you guys start dropping off, maybe I'll get some more structure in, but so I want to talk to you first. I want to give a shout out to Kansas Police Chief Gordon Ramsey. Those of you who saw my post, The Fatal Funnel and Dumb Cops, my fucking word. I posted that and I didn't even realize the police chief was called Gordon Ramsey. In Wichita? Wichita? Yeah, I think I've heard it said that. Wichita? You guys can fucking laugh at me, I'll laugh my ass off right back at you when you try and say, like, Edinburgh, or whatever the fuck. But Wichita, Kansas. The police chief there is Gordon Ramsey, and real fucking operators out there in Wichita, Kansas. Wichita, fuck, I can't do that naturally, guys. It's just gonna be Wichita. Yeah, I smoked a little bit before we started recording, if you couldn't tell. For those of you who didn't see the post, 3 Kansas officers were injured by a modified shotgun in a vacant home. So, no one shot them. You guys might remember my old Traps post, I'm gonna have to update it with a reference to this for the book, but authorities are investigating whether the shotgun had been rigged to fire when the door opened, as the article reads. So 3 cops, scenario here, these guys get called to this home, apparently there's like a dangerous individual inside, I guess. Someone calls it in, and so they show up and they surround the place, you know, kind of like scope it out for, I guess, a couple hours or something, and then they're like, okay, there's not a dude in there. And so 3 of them just stroll right the fuck up to the door, completely ignoring the fact that if there was a guy posted up in there, second you open the door, he's just gonna start blasting it. I think that's like everyone's natural response. If they have no kind of training, you just put a gun in their hand and you're like, okay, if someone comes through that door, waste them, you know? Oscar Pistorius style. But, yeah, so Police Chief Gordon Ramsey's cops walk right up and they open the door and get fucking blasted because all 3 of them were in the fatal funnel. They didn't have one guy like swing the door open or something, you know, from the side, or they just, all 3 of them tight as fuck to get hit by one shell. I don't know how far it was from the door or what they didn't even have pictures of the setup, but my fucking god, like if you ever thought it was kind of cartoonish, the idea of traps in the house for home defense or just as part of warfare, just this incident that just happened goes to show you it's not. You can do some pretty fucked up stuff to people if you're creative. Not endorsing that in any particular way. Try and make my future lawyer's job easier. Yeah, it's really fucking interesting. The Viet Cong really fucked up US forces without even being around with their punji sticks and, you know, other fucked up little traps. So, yes, three cops and I guess part of the department was brought to a stall by an empty house and a rigged shotgun. I just really want the police chief to just be Gordon Ramsay. That's what he does in the off season, like when he's done with his whatever he's filming that season. He just goes and he's like a small town police chief. Just walks up to the fucking bleeding out 3 deputies like, fucking dry performance. I don't think posh anger is quite in my repertoire. Anyway, so yeah, that was very entertaining to see. You know, it goes to show you that trained professionals don't know fucking shit, and also that traps are effective. And definitely gay. But yeah, very interesting things to note. Very interesting indeed. So, moving on. I think episode 1, someone asked me if I was reading, or if I'd read, The Story of Crass by George Berger. And it's now arrived, and it's on my list. But recently I just finished The Last of the Hippies by Penny Rimbaud of Crass. So, I wanted to just read like a few little extracts from it to give you an idea of what the book's about. It was really fucking interesting because it's I'm very interested at the minute in reading what older anarchists have to say. People who've lived their whole life living this philosophy. Because a lot of people tend to treat anarchism as this immature, like, ill-thought, ill-considered, ideology. It's just like an ideology of anger and rebellion, and it's just meant to be edgy, and, you know, it's like the contrarian thing. And so, I've been very interested in reading what people who've lived their entire life following, you know, a loose philosophy, because I'm interested in what all sorts of different anarchists from all sorts of different schools of thought have to say about how they've been treated, and how they've viewed their, you know, the events of their lifetime through that prism they have that not many others do. So, yeah, kind of a idol of mine, Penny Rimbaud. He's you know, pretty different, and he's a lot more pacifistic than I am, but I also am like leaning that way. Kind of what Seaburn talks about, for those of you who follow him and see. You know, he carries and stuff, and I carry, but it's like I am way more about de-escalation and protecting innocent people if I can, and I do have the capability to, so I should, but I wouldn't ever be trying to be, you know, like seeking out violence or anything. It would be an absolute last resort. And I know any sensible person who carries has that mindset, but I think it's just taking, like, the whole philosophy of people who carry, and taking it to an absolute extreme, kind of in line with the rest of my thoughts on individualism and stuff. It's like, life is valuable, and we should only take it at, you know, as a last resort. I was just listening again to Seaburn and Pat Watson from Uncensored Tactical on his show, their episode together, talking about peaceful, not harmless, which is a big mantra of mine over the last year or so. I've been really kind of focusing more on that concept, and so it's been leading me kind of down a hippie path. I'm still absolutely about, you know, being equal in capability of force to the people who want to lord over you. You should absolutely be as armed as they are. Again, I've moved away from that kind of bloodthirsty thing, which, like, definitely hardcore moved away from it, because I think so many of us come into this ideology with anger, and we have to see that there's solutions beyond violence. And so that's going to turn some people off, because some people are just here for the violence. They just like that kind of aesthetic of, like, fuck everything, nihilism, and violence will solve everything. But I see carrying and having weaponry as, like, a way of saying, I want to separate myself from you. I could separate myself from you forcefully, but I'm just gonna exist on my own. And if you come to my doorstep, that's you coming to me. I'm not threatening at first. I'm just dropping out. And if you come to me, then you're initiating the force. I think that's about the most consistent thing you can do if you dislike coercion and automated state violence as it exists today. Anyway, so a lot of what Penny talks about in the book, he does touch on wanting to be violent and stuff, which I really appreciate, because a lot of that wave of anarchists kind of coming out of the hippie era and realizing it was all for nothing. It was just like this drugged up dream where things felt like they were getting better, but they were actually getting tighter as they were, zoning out into a different world. They were ignoring what was happening around them. And so he's like, if we separate ourselves with violence, I'm just paraphrasing him, if we separate ourselves with violence, then we're just continuing the system. We're not ending it. It's just a different morphing of it, which is exactly what we see. Like, even the American Revolution just turned the monopoly of violence from the crown to a government. That government was originally tiny and, had fairly good values aside from the whole slavery thing, that small thing. And now it's the American Empire. And that's something else he touches on and kind of rekindled my thoughts about is satellite states, which is something that we only think about with like the USSR. So we have, communist Russia, and then it has its little holds elsewhere. It's, Ukraine and Poland and all that kind of stuff in Eastern Europe. And so we think satellite states is just like communism projecting itself. Not, we might know better, but the only example we can think of is that. And it's funny because the most powerful empire today is the US government, undeniably. And they have created the most effective array of satellite states. And not saying, there is any moral, really, there are no moral states, but there's no good guy countries. Like, it's all just framed differently. They're all evil, but they all paint each other as the bad guy to use us as cannon fodder. It's fucking insane. You think about what Russia was this big bad, like, invasive, spreading communism everywhere, which was true. They were trying to spread that, their power and their way of life everywhere, and extend their reach all over the world. But what was the US doing with West Germany, and kind of building up all these regime changes all over the world throughout the Cold War, and spreading democracy, aka killing the local leader and replacing it with someone who's a puppet for the US. I mean, we started in Germany and Japan and started going into the Middle East and South America and all over the place where we didn't belong, just fucking around and extending Western power. So that makes me sound like I've got a hammer and sickle flag up behind me right now. I promise you I don't. It's a big revolver. I don't know, it just makes you think, like, as we're growing up, we have this sterilized version of history. I mean, everywhere. Every state does this. Every state has a monopoly on history because, the victor writes the history books. And so that goes down to your public schools. They're saying, in this country, the westward expansion, like, we completely skip over any real talk about genociding the Native Americans. It's completely cleaned up to the point where it's like, oh yeah, we warred with them and kind of treats them as if they were pests, and we just, we were just cleaning up. It's kind of, that's what it fucking comes down to. And then, like they were a warring country that, just happened to get defeated. And there's, like, little tiny nods to being like, oh yeah, what we did was a little fucked up, teehee, but it doesn't fucking tell you anything about the real bloodbath of what went down. If you're into all that stuff, look up our episodes on the Emilish podcast with Skulls and Scalps, and follow her on Instagram. She, a native anarchist. Good stuff. I've always been interested in that kind of history because it's a genocide that's still happening. It's kind of crazy that we're just They just hoping they die off on these reservations, this shitty land that was unwanted. And it's just like, okay, we decimated your populace, forced you into our system so you could be our drones, and then put you in such a position that you were basically government handouts because they destroyed how they used to live. It's been such a decimation, and we just clean up that stuff in history. I say we. The state just cleans up history so easily. They'll happily just take out huge chunks. Like growing up in Britain, there's not one lesson in from primary through high school education about the revolution, the American Revolution, because that might give you ideas. Like obviously, no one's gonna be like, oh, it didn't happen, but it's just conveniently not in the curriculum. It's something you'd have to go and research on your own. They don't want it to be part of the culture at all, to know this big world-dominating empire. There's just really not a focus on it. It's mostly just nationalistic, like, oh yes, we had campaigns here, here, and here, and we beat back the Germans, and, oh, we fought those bloody French. It's, who were also imperialist fucks, so it's like fair game to say that, we were contesting with them, but we never go into, like, oh yeah, we plundered half the world for shit that didn't belong to us, and now it just sits in the National History Museum storage, not even on display, while countries are asking for it back. We just conveniently skip over just these blood-drenched institutions, because it's not like the government is a different thing than it was back then. It's the inheritor of all the violence it committed all over the world, not that long ago. Really not that fucking long ago. I kind of wanted to just give you guys my tinfoil hat rant today, if I'm honest. I wanted to talk about just the way that these systems operate, because this book, I think about this stuff all the fucking time. And so it's interesting to hear it from someone else, it's been interesting to hear someone's kind of informal thoughts. It's not, Rothbard or someone telling me this is, like, trying to convince me, oh, the state is evil because of this, and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's more just a person's honest views, because he's not, he's like a philosopher, I guess, but he's not like, he's not writing theory, he's just explaining his point of view. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, both to relay some of his thoughts on this episode, and and my own, just to put it all out there in one long form kind of tinfoil rant, to pick apart at your pleasure. Yeah, let's find some quotes. So this is what I was talking about with the militant stuff. Throughout my life of revolt, my support has constantly veered between out-and-out pacifism and militant activism. Crass caught me at a time when pacifism seemed to be the way forward. Just at the moment in 2008, I've swung heavily in the opposite direction. So even as an older man, still feeling spicy every now and then, which I feel is kind of naturally how the e-militia goes. Sometimes we're all like peace and fucking love and dip out, and sometimes it's like, hey, a bunch of retards almost took over the Capitol and none of them were armed. For all the well-intentioned, peaceful protests against the thises and that's of global oppression, it seems pretty clear to me that no one is listening. The New World Order is winning, hands down. The madmen are on top. Yes, we can form our self-help groups, call pub meetings to discuss a left which has ceased to exist, kid ourselves that we're living our lives outside the system. But meanwhile, the politicians, militarists, mafias, and multinational corporations simply get on with their agenda of global slavery. I don't want to be a slave. In fact, I'm not going to be one. Filth like Tony Blair sticks in my gullet. The memory of Thatcher haunts my soul, violates everything that I consider to be decent and worthwhile. Wish them dead? Yes. Well, at least silenced, lots of times. But I'm too fucking nice to do anything about it in any case. Where would I start? Of course it would be revengeful, but just how much are we expected to put up with psychically damaging bullshit like Blair's I know I was wrong, but feel I was right, or Bush's God told me to do it? The truth is, I'm tired of being nice, but don't really know how to be nasty. But for all that, I'm equally tired of reformist dribblings. Never mind global warming. What about global warning? Have we listened? Have we learnt? Okay, so just because pacifism hasn't really worked, does that give us cause to dismiss it? Of course not. But how many deaths do we have to witness? Are the Palestinians going to win their righteous cause by chanting slogans beneath the shadow of Israeli oppression? How many Jews escape the death camps through peaceful protest? How come the special relationship forces in Iraq don't take a week off to demolish the hideous Israeli walls? Where are we at? How come the powers that be can so easily destroy 3,000 innocent lives in the World Trade Center Reichstag, yet can't put a stop to the partitioning of Israel? Democracy and peace, closer to home are the peace walls of Belfast. Bringing peace or bottling up hostility? So a lot to unpack there, but he's, even recently, I know it was 12 years ago now, but even recently feeling that anger bubbling up again, and I'm like, fuck, is that gonna be me forever? I'm gonna go between, like, hardcore unplugging and doing militant shit. I don't know. Sounds exhausting, but I think that's kinda what it's gonna be. Here's another banger. Government inquiries are frequently used to trick the general public into thinking that something positive is being done about situations where the system has been seen to step out of line. These token gestures allow the authorities to commit atrocious crimes against the people while suffering no real fear of reprisal. Almost sounds like a summer of protests about police brutality, followed by an administration change that does nothing about it. It's kind of the fucking mode. It's what the government does every fucking time, because people think they can fix government with government. And that's how it's always fucking been. And because people fail to see correlation because they don't want to see correlation. Because if they don't see correlation, they don't have to think. They can just tell the system to do what it always does, which is to think for them. Because we're just fucking tax cattle. We just use our labor to do something they can tax and leech off of. The government is just like a babysitter that doesn't give a fuck about you. They're like, I'm talking like a babysitter when you're like 17, probably even 18, and your parents are paying them way too much, and they're taking stuff out of your fridge. You don't need them, you would have been fine on your own, and then they're just fucking abusing you. And you're like, why is this person in my home? Leave me the fuck alone, stranger. And they just take your shit, and they break stuff, and they cause you all this unnecessary headache. And you know you don't need a babysitter, but everyone tells you you do. I don't know. Was everyone a kid that was like, kind of distrustful of adults because you thought public education was bullshit and you were wondering why everyone was so hyped up about you doing well in it? I feel like a lot of the community probably had a similar experience growing up in public education, if you went that route. Some of you fuckers were lucky enough to be raised by libertarian parents, which is insane. Or like hippie parents. My parents were, I grew up in a fucking weird household, ladies and gentlemen. Like, it did me really well in the end, but military dad, and then my mum was like this OG British goth, and also kind of hippie woman, so yeah, that's kind of how you end up with a libertarian, I guess, over time. Militant plus hippie equals libertarian. I don't know, it sounds like an equation that makes sense to me. Alright, I'm going to read you one last bit from this book. I might do some more in the future, just because I like these little extracts, but it's definitely worth picking up. The Last of the Hippies by Penny Rimbaud, but his name's spelled like Rimbaud. Rimbaud. Penny Rimbaud. But Penny Rimbaud. That's why I don't mind American English. It drops all the French stuff, which is confusing and doesn't work with like English pronunciations. But I'm just an idiot, so don't listen to me. So this last bit is pretty relevant because mental illness has absolutely been weaponized by the state. And this is a big focus of the book because Penny's friend Wally Hope, the last of the hippies, as kind of the thing goes, he was killed by the state after he was incarcerated and turned from, a perfectly healthy, well-adjusted individual, just a free thinker, to a shaken, pale, sickly, hopelessly depressed victim of mental institutions who eventually killed himself because of what he'd been through, all because the state had taken him in and fucked with him. He was arrested for a small amount of LSD being on his person, nothing else. And the guy was only being investigated because he helped run the he helped found the Windsor Free Festival in the 70s, which was a kind of a hippie squat, but as a music festival, and it was basically to promote, it was kind of anti-monarchist because it was on government or state land in a park, and the idea was essentially to say, oh, this is the people's, which it, in a sense, is if it's taxpayers, so fuck it, do what you want on government property as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, they targeted him for doing things outside of the appropriate channel, the approved channels, and, there's no crime so small the state won't kill you for it. So anyway, the passage goes, since the beginning of time, mental illness has been used as a powerful political weapon against those seeking or operating social change. A lot of the bogus definitions given for so-called madness were invented in the 20th century by quack psychologists and were then used unscrupulously by those in authority to dismiss and punish those who dared to question their reality. In truth, terms like schizophrenia, neurotic, and paranoid mean little more than what any particular or not so particular individual chooses them to mean. Obviously, there are people with actual mental illnesses. This is not like a denial of that. So he goes on to say, there are no physical proofs for any of these conditions. The definitions vary from psychiatrist to psychiatrist and are totally different from one country to another. Because of these very variable standards, the chances of being diagnosed schizophrenic in America are far higher than they are in Britain. This led one unusually illuminated psychiatrist to suggest that the best cure for many American mental patients would be to catch a flight to Britain. The label of mental illness is a method of dealing with individuals, from unwanted relatives to social critics who, through not accepting the conditions imposed upon them by outsiders, are seen as nuisances and troublemakers. That sounds a little bit familiar to red flag laws, does it not? Or the drug war? Both convenient ways to lock people up, because you call them unstable, or dangerous to themselves, or... because red flag laws are not just for oh, old Bill has some real strange opinions and he's a vet, and I know he has a rifle. It's also oh, this guy has a gun, and he's been looking a little bit sad recently and pop in some antidepressants, so he's probably going to kill himself. We should invade his home and take his guns for his own health. So we can see this is just a common, and always has been a historic tool of authority to shut someone down. You just point at the guy and call him crazy, and then you don't really care if someone kicks in his door and shoots him or, burns down his compound in Waco. The works of psychologists, notably Freud, and the many schools of perverts who follow their teachings have, by isolating states of mind and defining some of them as states of madness, excluded all sorts of possible developments in the way in which we see, or could see, our reality. By allowing people to learn from the experience of their so-called madness rather than punishing them for it, new radical ways of thought could be realized and engaged with, new perspectives created, and new horizons reached. How else has the human mind grown and developed? Nearly all the major advances in society have been made by people who are criticized, ridiculed, and often punished in their own time, only to be celebrated as great thinkers years after their deaths. So, a little parallel with fucking Alex Jones there. Not really what was intended when this was written, but there's all sorts of crazy people who were like, fuck, why is he talking like that? And then 5 years later it's like, can you tell me more about that thing you were talking about at the bar? Fucking Bitcoin as well. Everyone's crazy until they're not. As mental and physical health become increasingly controllable with drugs and surgery, we come ever closer to a world of hacked about and chemically processed Mr. and Mrs. Normals, aka good tax cattle, whose only purpose in life will be to mindlessly serve the system. From then on, cultural progress will cease, and the mindfuckers will have finally won their battle against the human spirit. Democracy? Let's call it brainwashing. So, pretty fucking timely considering this was... when was this originally released? So, 1982, so 39 years later, still pretty fucking relevant, which is scary and disappointing, but that's the way society progresses, I guess. I have no doubt the good tradition of calling people crazy and doing away with their opinions before you even let them have a stage to speak them on is going to continue. It has been continuing, and it's like the number one way to shut someone down. Anyone remember that politician who gave out the little yell? It was like, I think it was a Democrat going against Bush and Gore back in the day, and he gave some little like "hee-yah" kind of sound at the end of his speech because he was very excited, and they just played that over and over until the guy got laughed out of politics from one sound. I mean, the guy was probably your typical run-of-the-mill, boring blue tyrant, but they made him sound like some absolute lunatic from one soundbite, so doesn't take much. So anyway, I think I'll wrap up with me reading aloud to you guys. It's quite enough for one episode, but story time would be but yeah, it's a good little book. Lots of timely observations, and I think it's worthwhile to read stuff beyond theory stuff, just casual opinions and casual observations of people who've been doing this, in a different era to us. And there's a lot you can learn. There's lots of things I kind of, I thought about, but he touches on in a lot more detail. He'd spent a lot more time thinking about than I would, because he has different major focuses, so that kind of shit's interesting. But yeah, I think we're going to keep it nice and short and sweet today. And wrap up with some questions. So, oh, Christ. When you're gonna get a PC so you can join the GNG Discord? You think I edit these podcasts on my phone? Christ, join a Discord that guns set up. I don't even want to see what it's like in there. It's probably a fiery shit show. Plus, I'm so not a Discord guy. I'm so sorry, guys. I cannot be fucked to keep up with those conversations. I leave for an hour, come back, and there's like 260 messages, and most of them are like Pepe. Can't be doing it. Love you, but no. If you could choose one politician to spontaneously combust, who... It probably wouldn't even be like out of spite or anything. It would just be who would be the funniest. So... probably Mitch McConnell. I think he would make an absolute show of it. He'd probably just cook inside his suit because he's a giant old white tortoise. Do you exercise and train in kit? Fave exercise movements if you do. Not nearly as much as I should. But something that people do talk about is like wearing heavy kit and doing like any exercise where you're gonna be fucking up your joints, like high impact if you're running or something, or even jogging in a plate, you're like just wearing away your joints for no reason. So not big on that stuff. But doing like slow rep weight stuff is kind of good. Well, no, it's very good for you. You're adding weight. From my understanding, I'm not a personal trainer, don't fucking listen to me, but that's what I do. Slow weight stuff, just wearing a vest if anything, or slow, even just wearing it while doing, like sit-ups or something, just extra weight. You 3D printing? Yeah, I think the whole e-militia is at this point. Everyone's at some point in the process. Are you worried about a new world order? I don't think there's like an Illuminati or some shit. It's a bunch of people want their country to be the top dog so they can get the best deal. That's all it really is. Just a bunch of fucking greedy people with armies. I don't think there's really like a big shadowy group of people who want to do it all together, because there's, I don't know, too many conflicting ways of doing things and too many people who want to be at the top to ever have like one group controlling it all. So I don't subscribe to all that kind of shit. That's too tinfoil hat even for me. I get to talk shit about something that I enjoy talking shit about. Fascism or socialism, you must pick one. I mean, I'd rather fucking yeah, take a long walk off a short cliff, but I feel like socialists would just revolt every 4 years and it would be kind of fun, but fascists, it would just be living under a boot forever. I mean, they're both living under a boot, but I feel like society would be boring as fuck under fascists. Just objectively, I think things would be on fire pretty much always under a socialist government. Fascist, it would be just like lots of flags and Gucci uniforms and, I don't know, probably speaking German, which I'm not big on. Or Italian, that would be even worse. Alright, this is actually a pretty good one to wrap up on. How does someone who's curious about destating their mind, I guess like deprogramming, whatever the fuck you want to call it, getting over like statism, destating their mind but stay out of conspiracy drivel. I imagine it's kind of hard. I've always been like really skeptical about everything, so kind of naturally I'm like, that's bullshit, fuck you. But when you start really nosediving into this stuff, you can kind of go along with really a lot of what you hear. It's like, I can see how you can fall into some of the crazy shit that you hear. Like, I joke about politicians being lizards, but there's people who believe that shit. I don't really. I just acknowledge that the state is full of people who are selfish fucking monsters who will gladly sacrifice their own children if it means getting their third home. Like, they do not give a fuck. They want their kids to go to, military schools and to have that prestige and just use them as a token in their political agenda. These are the kind of people running the world. So when I hear stuff, like really crazy conspiracy stuff, I'm like, that's probably not true. I can see why someone would believe it. I'm not going to circulate it personally. But also at the same time, like, no matter how awful the thing is, like, if you really want to go off the deep end, I don't know, like, politicians stay young by using fetuses and they sap their lifeblood and do sacrifices and shit. Or, like, that's like the kind of stuff you hear a lot from the QAnon types. And I'm sure there's some weird shit going on, but they're already so reprehensible in the real world with things we can 100% prove. Like, the Afghanistan papers, they prove they went over there, they invaded the Middle East and started waging chaos for no fucking reason. They had no idea why they were going there. Or how to explain it, or what the mission was, or anything. It was just a complete clusterfuck. And so I don't think you have to go digging to, like, they perform child sacrifices to be like, they're evil. They're evil on paper. They're openly evil. So that's kind of how I stay out of those rabbit holes. Like, I feel like the burden of proof is so much higher, and there's so much low-hanging fruit that does the job anyway. You don't have to go too nuts to get into it. Yeah, I guess just approach everything with skepticism, and that there's almost certainly politicians who went and fucked kids on Epstein's Island. They're fucking very evil people with things we can prove. Maybe they go out in the woods and pray to an owl statue. That seems pretty likely. Was it Bohemian Grove? It's entirely possible they do weird cult shit. But what you can actually see in front of you does the job enough, I think 100% research those things, and they're interesting, but I think be skeptical, even with people you hate. Like, don't allow confirmation bias to take over and be like, oh, well, these people are evil, so they probably also do X, Y, or Z. It's like, then you're gonna go overboard and go from, you know, having very fair reasons for despising these people to just sounding like another raving lunatic. So yeah, I think that's how you stay out of that rabbit hole. We're far down enough. We don't need crazy. At least not in our. I like to treat conspiracy theories like a hobby. It's fun to talk about. We talk shit about it, but there's so much awfulness in the real world before you start getting into the fantasy territory. So yeah, I think I'm gonna end it there. Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you next time.